Hey guys, and welcome back to a new Jetpack Compose video. In this video, I will give you a full guide with all the best practices about responsive UI in Jetpack Compose. So if you know nothing about responsiveness in Jetpack Compose, but you know a little bit of Jetpack Compose, then this video is for you. This will use Compose Multiplatform here in this video, but what I go over here is very much also applicable to native Android projects. So if you use Jetpack Compose over there. And the UI that we will specifically build here comes from Figma, which I've opened here and will give you a little bit of an impression. So it's specifically this login screen UI that you can see here with two text fields, an email and a password, a button, and a link that should go to the next page. And of course, this little header section. It's important for me to say here that we focus on responsiveness. So we won't give this login screen here real functionality. If you want to do that and want to learn that, then join the Mobile Dev Campus, because these mockups actually come directly from an app challenge in the campus. Which you get there, you get API access in order to really practice app development here with a real world setting, with requirements, these mockups, with a real API integration that we give you here to make this login work, and then also, of course, build a real app afterwards. But we will stick to the login screen as it is here. So you can see this is the mobile portrait version. But if we go over here, you can see this is how it should look like in landscape layout. And there is also a tablet variant. So here, this is how it should look like on tablet. So without filling the maximum width here of the screen, also centering these elements. And in tablet landscape mode, it will also look exactly like in portrait. And maybe you've already watched the video about Compose Multiplatform theming, so how you can really set up a solid Material 3 theme in your Compose Multiplatform app. Then you know that we've already worked on this app before here, and we've already set up the text styles. So for these two different fonts, we've already set up the color scheme and so on. In case you did not watch this video, then I will link it up here because it makes sense to watch this first. Or if you say, hey, I already fully understand theming in Compose Multiplatform, you just want to learn about responsiveness, then I will link a GitHub repository with an initial branch below, which already includes this base theming setup. So you will be able to see this here. If we scroll over and up here, this is the theme that we stick to. So we have some colors, we have some font styles. And here in Android Studio, these are already set up, which I really went over in detail in this other video. So if this is interesting to you, watch the video. If not, clone the initial code from GitHub below and jump right into responsiveness. All right, so where do we start? With this video, I really don't just want to type off all the code here, and that really gives us this responsive UI, but I want to involve you in my thinking process, what I do when I face such mockups here, because in the real world, that's always the case. You get some sort of mockups and you need to replicate these in a responsive way. So I give you my thinking process behind how I would take such a UI, break it down into single UI components, into single composables, and then lastly decide how these components are wired together in a responsive way. And that's always the first thing you have to do before you get into the actual implementation of responsive design. And that is, of course, just looking at the mockups and all the different screen variants that differ in some way. So here we have mobile portrait mode. You've already seen this. All the elements in the end stretch the entire screen's width with a little bit of padding. If we head over to the landscape mode, then you can see what was previously all in a column-wise fashion is now at least partly in a row-like fashion. So now here, the login header is next, so left of the actual section with the text fields. And if we take a look at the tablet variant, then here is different again, because here on the one hand, the header is centered. The text here are both centered. And the form itself now has a maximum width. So it suddenly doesn't fill the entire screen's width anymore, but has to find a certain maximum width. And now when it comes to responsiveness, then there are pretty much two different scenarios we could end up in. Scenario number one is that certain UI components really just differ in size on different screen sizes. So best example would be here. If we take a look on mobile, these text fields are certainly not as wide as the ones here on tablet. If you really just have these pure size differences, then you don't need to handle a lot of this at all, because you can just rely on dynamic units in your Compose UI. So dynamic units means you don't hard code the size, so the width of this text field section here, for example, but you leave it dynamic. So you rely on relative units, for example, a certain percentage of the screen width. You rely on modifiers in Compose, like the weight modifier inside of a row and a column. You rely on modifiers that give a certain section a maximum width. So by just making use of these modifiers, these dynamic size modifiers in a smart way, you can already achieve a big part of the responsive UI without actually having to have any checks at all where you say, okay, if the device is on mobile portrait, if the device is on mobile landscape, if the screen width is this, then show this, otherwise show this. No, if it's just about the different sizes, then in most cases, use relative and dynamic units. However, if your UI really has a different structure on different screen sizes, so here, for example, this UI of the login screen here in mobile landscape definitely has different structure than in mobile portrait, because here we have a pure column-based layout, but here we have a row-based layout. That is something where we don't get around using something called window size classes. So that is a concept that comes from Jetpack Compose, where it pretty much categorizes our window, so our mobile device, into distinct classes, depending on the screen width or the screen height, or both. And then we can say, okay, if the window width size class is, for example, compact, which would mean it's very likely a mobile portrait device because it's not very wide, then show this UI, put our UI elements inside of a column. And if it's, for example, medium or expanded, which would be a mobile landscape layout, then put it in a row instead. So for these structural differences of different screens, we typically need to stick to these window size classes, or at least checking the screen width and height in some way. Another scenario where you also have to rely on these window size classes is if certain properties that are not the size change depending on the screen size. So for example, here in this case, we see on tablet, the header section is actually centered, while on both mobile landscape and mobile portrait, it's left aligned. This is also something we can't just implement by using relative units or so, because we need to say, hey, if the screen width is something like this, then left align it, and otherwise center align it. And the art, after all, is now really just to taking a look at the mockups and extracting isolated components here out of this UI that are the same on every single screen size. So here, for example, if we take a look at mobile portrait, mobile landscape, and tablet, what we can notice is that this whole email, password, button, and link section is identical on all these screen widths. The only thing that differs for this section here is, again, the width that should be filled, but as I said, that is something we can solely solve with relative units. Also, if we take a look at this header section here that consists of 2 text composables after all, in regards to the structure, this is also identical on all devices, because the header text is always placed above the description text. The only thing that differs here is the alignment. So what we can definitely do is we can also extract that into a separate composable, that we put these 2 texts in a column and then just pass in the text alignment as a parameter, so we can just change that for the tablet device. And then for the outer layout, so the layout in which we put both this header section and this text field section, that is something that then also needs to change depending on the window size class, because here it would be placed in a column-wise fashion. So this header section, you can even see the boxes around that. That together with this text field section would be arranged column-wise. In landscape, it would be arranged in a row-based layout, so next to each other. And in portrait, it's really just like on tablet that we also place these on top of each other. So by sticking to this kind of algorithm in your mind, you really achieve this responsive design while minimizing the code that you actually have to write for it. So the absolute worst practice that you could stick to here is really just have one big when expression at your root UI and then implement 3 different screens, 3 different UIs completely differently with a lot of duplicated code. You don't need that. Make sure to use composables, what they were meant to be used for, to extract them and then reuse them as often as possible. So now I've talked a lot, but I think this is necessary to really involve you in this thinking process behind. So you can also go out of this video and then really approach your own UIs. But I would say we now dive into our own code here in Android Studio, and we can start with something simple. Let's say we want to start with the actual button. For these components that are really core of our app, kind of, so like this primary button here that is very likely going to be reused across the app, or these text fields, it's very likely we're not going to need text fields only here on this screen. I like to put these in some kind of design system package. For example, here, I would just put this in the root package. In a real project, I would have some sort of better package hierarchy. But let's say we have a design system package, and in here, we are going to place something like a note mark button. So note mark is the name of this app here. And we want to have our own button. Yes, let me add that to GitHub. And then we are going to get started with a note mark button composable. Think about what kinds of parameters this needs. Of course, the text. Of of course, an on-click lambda, an on-click lambda, and a modifier. There is certain behavior that I won't implement here in this video because it doesn't really help us with responsive design. For example, that this button could also be disabled, or that these text fields could have an error or a supporting text here. These are things that you would have to implement based on the mockups. Somewhere down here, you can see there are error states for these text fields. But I will really just stick to the pure UI so that we have our responsive design, because that's the focus of this video. And in here, we want to rely on this button composable. We can forward our on-click lambda. We can forward our modifier. And for the actual text of this button, we can say text, with the text being equal to text. The shape of this button should also be changed a little bit. So here I will rely on rounded corner shape of 10 dp. And what I want to change is the color, of course, because we have this blue primary color, which again, we've already set up a theme for. So here you can see I've set up a basic light color scheme with primary color, surface color, and so on, which we are now going to reference. So here we want to use button defaults dot button colors and change the container color of this button to material theme, color scheme, and use our primary color. I also want to add a little bit of content padding, a little bit more than it would apply by default, something like 12 dp here. And then make sure that this text sticks to the text style, material theme, typography, title small. So that's something we can also find out from mockups. If we take a look at these buttons, click on the text, then you can see here the typography is referenced as title small. So we are going to stick to that as well. And that's already our button. Let's next get to our node mark text field in our design system package. Node mark text field, file, composable, node mark text field. And here we can mostly rely on the already existing material 3 outline text field. So we need to pass the actual text, so the value of this text field, on value change, so a lambda that gives us the new string when the user typed something. I want to pass a label. I want to pass a hint. The difference between label and hint is that the label is above the text field, and the hint is what would show in the text field if we don't have anything put in here, like this sample email. And I want to have a boolean is input secret. So if it's a secret text field for password, for example, because in that case, we want to show, want to hide that, of course. And we also want to show the password visibility toggle icon. That's something we can also decide with a state here. So is the password visible by, remember, mutable state of false. Initially, it's not visible. I'll enter twice here to import this statement. And for such composable components that are very self-contained, where it's very likely I would never ever have different behavior for this visibility icon, because in the end, we just want to toggle the visibility when we click on it. That's all we pretty much ever want for such a password text field. In these cases, I like to implement the state in the composable directly, but in most cases, for most state, you want to put this in a view model instead. So now we are going to have a column, so a column that consists of a text and a text field, so the label and the text field. I will put this together here in one composable, since it's always used like that in this app. Say the modifier is modifier, and then in here, we're going to have a text composable with the text being equal to our label, and with the text style being equal to material theme, typography, body, medium. Like this, we can add a little bit of spacing here with a spacer, which we give a modifier height 60p. And below the spacer, we will then finally have our text field, so the outline text field for material 3 design. The value of it is simply our text. On value change is also on value change. Then we can pass a visual transformation. So this is what really hides the password if it is a password field. So if our is input secret boolean is true, we want to assign a password visual transformation, and we can give this a mask of these asterisks, since that changed a little bit here in these mockups. It's not these circular masks, but actually asterisks. And else we can say visual transformation.none. So then we just show the text as it is, if it's, for example, an email text field. We need to change a lot about the colors to match our mockups. So here we can say outlined text field defaults, colors. And in here we can then change all kinds of colors. You can see a lot of them. For example, the focused container color. So the background color of our text field if it's currently focused, if we are about to enter something, which should be color, import this here, dot transparent. Why? Well, because if it's focused, you can see the background is transparent, and then it uses the whatever is behind that. Color transparent, then the unfocused container color. So if the text field is not focused, then we do want to give it a color of material theme, color scheme dot surface, and all these colors again come from the mockups. They are referenced in the design. I want to give it a cursor color of our primary one, so material theme, color scheme, primary. We want to give it a focused border color, so the border of the text field, if it's focused, that should be material theme dot color scheme primary as well, or a bluish color. And lastly, an unfocused border color. So if it's not focused, that should not exist. So there shouldn't be a border. So we can say transparent as well. We can then give this a placeholder, which is pretty much the hint. So the text here would be our hint text. And the style of this one would be material theme typography body large. The same text style I want to also apply to the text field itself. So this is really just a hint, but we want to also apply the same text style here to the actual text contents of this text field. So we can say text style is equal to body large. Let's give this a shape of rounded corner shape, 10 dp corner radius. And here, of course, you could also rely on the material 3 shapes, which have at least shown you how you could define this here. If you want to use these, you can also reference these directly. And lastly, we want to reference a trailing icon. So in case we want to have a password text field, then we want to show this password visibility toggle. So if is inputs, or let's actually make this a when expression. When is input secret and is password visible? So if we have a password text field and the password is visible, then we actually want to put this in an icon button. So on click, here we would say is password visible is equal to is password visible negated. And in here, we then conditionally show a different icon, either if the password is visible or if it's not visible. Actually, we only want to show this icon button here if our is input secret is true. So only if we want to have an icon, then we actually don't need this here in the when expression. Then we can say if password is visible or if it's not visible, create an icon here with an image vector, which is equal to icons. And that is a dependency that is not there by default. So we need to add this by going to build.gradle KTS, going to our common main dependencies. And here we can simply duplicate a line and just reference compose material icons extended. This already comes from the Compose Multiplatform plugin, so you don't need to add anything in your version catalog for that. This will work out of the box. So then in here, after this has synced, we can reference icons dot default visibility. If it's visible, then we want to show visibility. Content description could be hide password. And if it is not visible, then we say visibility off and we say show password. So that should be our text field. And the last reusable component here that I want to create is our little link. So this is super easy, as you can guess. So we could just go to design system again and create a node mark link file, make this a composable node mark link, which can of course get a text and something like an on-click lambda, which we actually don't need here since we don't want to give this real behavior in this case. We say, okay, that's a text composable. The text is our text. We give it a modifier. If we click it, so clickable, then we can say, hey, we trigger our on-click lambda. We can give it a text style, which is a material theme, typography, title small. We give it a color, so our primary color since it's a blue link. And we can say text align is text align.center. And that's already our link. So now we have those reusable components. As I said, that's always the first step that I go over, since for these components itself, you rarely have to implement any responsive logic already, since most of their dimensions they already get from the modifier being passed in. So the magic now happens in our actual screen composable. So if we go to our root package in the common main module, and we create something like a login package, in which we now create a new Kotlin file called login screen, that is now where the magic happens. So login screen, And in the end, we want to keep this composable here as small as possible, despite having all those different screen variants. And here for this composable, I will actually also place this already in our app.kt file. So here we can remove all the sample code and just say login screen. And then we can already launch the desktop variant, because the desktop variant in Compose Multiplatform, as of right now, it comes with hot reload. And then we can easily see our changes. So if we go to desktop main, and I'm here, by the way, on the Android Studio Canary version, is necessary for you to see, actually it's not here. Am I maybe on the wrong version about Android Studio? Oh no, this is actually the Canary version. For some reason, hot reload is not there. Normally you would see some kind of option here. But then whatever, let's just launch it on our normal device. There is also a way to launch the app with hot reload via Gradle task, but I don't have that in my mind right now. So here, this is how it looked like in the previous video. So if we now launch this normally, then we should see just a blank screen here, since we did not put in anything in our login screen UI yet. That is, of course, what follows now. The root composable should usually be a scaffold to just handle window insets. So the spacings for the status bar and the system components. We can say modifier, give it a modifier of fill max size. And then in here, we get the inner padding, which contains the window insets. And I would say we just start off with the mobile portrait variant here. So we just build this, and then we can add the conditions to also show a different UI in different scenarios. So for mobile portrait, we want to show all these elements here in a column-wise fashion. So we have our header section. As I mentioned, this is something we should also extract in a separate composable, since this is the same on all screens. And then we can just put all our other composables here also in a column, because no matter on which screen size we are at, this particular section here is always arranged in a column-wise fashion. So if we're here and we go down here, we could do this with a composable function. Let's say this is our login header section, something like that. And here we then have a column that gets passed in our modifier. And then for the text here that we want to show, the first one is simply login, or header text. We give it the corresponding style that our header text should have: material theme, typography, title large. And then below that, we have our little description text that should say, capture your thoughts and ideas. And this should not have the title large style, but the body large one. And since on mobile portrait, as I said, we want to now arrange this header section and the other login text field section in a column-wise fashion, let's first of all put a column in here. So we say we have a column. In here, we then have our login header section. We perhaps make it fill the maximum width, so modifier fill max width. And this column we also need to slightly change here by a modifier, for example, to fill the maximum size, to then forward our inner padding that we get from the scaffold, so to consider our window insets. And you can see here in the UI we have this actual, which looks like a bottom sheet, but it's in the end just something we can achieve with a chained modifier. So we have our background color, which is this blue one, and on top we then show our surface color that we've defined in the theme. So here, this is actually the surface lowest color, which is pure white. And that is what we can achieve with this modifier. So here, by default, this column, as you can see on the left, this would have our blue background color. But now we want to render our white sheet content on top of that, which we can achieve with this column. So first of all, I want to make sure that we clip this by a rounded corner shape. And here, I only want to clip the top start and the top end. So only the top left and top right corner by 15 dp and top end as well. Then after clipping, we can give this a background to really have this white color, which is material theme, color scheme, surface lowest, surface container lowest. We can then give it some padding. And if we launch this, you should already see how this looks like. So you can see this is already going in the right direction. I want to give this some padding so it's not at the left edge of our screen. Specifically different padding between horizontal and vertical orientation. So horizontal a little bit more, actually a little bit less, 16 dp, and vertical a little bit more of 24 dp. And then you can see how this looks better. Something we also don't want is that this navigation bar here is actually blue. That happens because of this inner padding, which by default in the scaffold applies both the status bar's padding as well as the navigation bar's padding. We can change this by giving this scaffold here window insets, content window insets, of window insets dot status bar. So we just want the status bars here above. If we do this, then you can see everything is white, but we still need to add these window insets here to our column in this case, since otherwise content may be overlapped by our navigation bar, which we don't want because then users couldn't interact with this. So we want to say consume window insets, and we say window insets dot navigation bars. And by doing so, we always make sure that if we scroll to the very top, then the padding here at the bottom would be considered. And now in the end, all that is really missing here for our UI is to have one single column in which we place all the composables we've already built. So it looks like there is still a lot of missing, but it actually isn't. So we'll go down here, create another composable, which we say login form section, for example. Here we want to pass in our text field states. So let's say email text, on email text change, provide lambdas, and the same for the password one. Password text, on pass text change, give the changed password here as a string, and then simply a modifier. And as I said, we put this all in a column. We say we pass our modifier to this column, and then we have our text field first, so our note mark text field, where the text is our email text. On value change is our on email text change. The label is email. The hint can be johndoe@example.com. Is input secret for the email text field is false. And modifier here can just be one that fills the whole width of our outer column. Then let's have some spacing below this text field. Spacer modifier is modifier height of 16 dp. And then we have our other text field for the password. Copy paste. This would be the password text in this case. This would be on password text change. The label would be password. And the hint would also just be password in this case. Is input secret in this case would be true, of course. And then below that, as we can see on the mockups, really just the button and the link is missing. So if we copy the spacer, put it below to have some more spacing. Well, let's have a little bit of more spacing here. Then below the spacer, we can have our note mark button. The text can be log in. On click would be just blank here, since as I said, we don't want to give this functionality. And the modifier would also say modifier fill max width. Then below this note mark button, we will have another little spacer and finally have our link. This one can be 16 dp again, but then we say we have note mark link, where the text says don't have an account. On click is empty. And lastly, modifier would be modifier align. So to align this in the middle of our column horizontally. So we can say alignment, import that, center horizontally. And if we show this now, so this login form section, up here below our login header section, login form section, and we also create some local states here for these text fields. So var email text, by remember, mutable state of, alt enter import that, empty string by default, and then alt enter to import this delegate, actually alt enter twice. And we have the password text, which is also empty by default. So then with these two states, we can go down here, say email text is email text. On email text change, then we say our email text is equal to the new text. Password text should be password text. On password text change is password text is it. So the new password that the user has entered. And we can then say modifier is modifier fill max width like that. And if we launch this, then we should already see something, not yet the fully nice looking UI, as you can see. So we have a couple of problems here, as you can see. On the one hand, we definitely need more space between this login text section and our text fields. Then these text fields should, of course, fill the entire width of our screen. Let's take a look at that first. It may be that we don't forward this modifier here of the note mark text field. Let's command click into that. Actually, we do, but this outline text field here does not fill the maximum width. So we want to say we give this a modifier of modifier fill max width. So it fills the maximum width of our parent, and then you can see it already updates this here in live, and that looks better. Now let's give this some spacing here. On the one hand, here some spacing to the top. That is something we can achieve by scrolling up and giving this column here some top padding. So top something like 48 dp. Then you can see we move this down a little bit. And we can then also tell our column to use vertical arrangement of arrangement spaced by 32 dp, for example. And then this will add 32 dp of spacing between each composable in this column, which are just our two sections. And I think this 48 dp looks a little bit weird. That's too much. Here in mobile portrait, I don't think we actually need spacing. But for the other variants, for tablet specifically, yeah, here we want more spacing. So let's remove this top padding here. Yeah, that looks much better. So on mobile portrait, this already looks pretty nice. We can go in here, we can type something in these text fields, we can toggle our password. No, we can't. Let's go to the text field very quickly. I think we don't use the state. It should be used here for the visual transformation instead of is input secret. So if is password visible, and then you can see we can, yeah, now we can toggle it. And these icons are also swapped. So this should be visibility off, and this should be visibility like this. And yeah, if we now want to click here, you can see now it's visible, now it's not visible, and so on. But as you can guess, this does not look like we want on other orientations, on other display sizes. So you can see in landscape, on the one hand, it's not scrollable. That's something you also always have to consider here with responsive design, that not every screen size is as large as the device you test this on. And as you can guess here on tablets, if we launch a medium tablet, this one, for example, it'll of course also not look like we want, because we did not explicitly implement anything like that. And that is now really where window size classes come into play. And for that, we need to add a little dependency. So window size classes, after all, just categorize a screen's width and the screen's height into distinct, clear classes, specifically compact, medium, and large, or expanded it's called. And for that, we can hop into our version catalog here under Gradle, libs versions, and we want to add the adaptive library, specifically the version 1.1.1 as of now. If you're watching this at a later point, you may want to update this, of course. For the actual dependency, and I don't think we can reference this like we did here, or can we? Adaptive material 3. It's navigation suite, that's not what we want. So let's add this with a version catalog. Specifically, this material 3 adaptive library, you can copy paste this from my GitHub below if you want, or just quickly type it off. But this brings our window size classes here in our project. So we sync this, we then go to our build a Gradle file, and then say we have implementation libs dot material 3, what is it called? Material 3 adaptive, yeah, probably just needs to sync. So libs, do we see this now? Oh, come on, Android Studio. So libs, material 3, yes, there it is, adaptive, make sure to add this, sync this, and then we can jump back in our login screen. Because now, as I mentioned, these window size classes are necessary for two things. On the one hand, if we have a completely different structure, so you want to have maybe a different root layout for your UI. On the one screen, you want to have a column, and on the other screen, you want to have a row, which is definitely the case here between portrait and landscape on mobile. And if you want different certain properties based on the screen's width or height. So in our case, different text align, or something like a different color, different, I don't know, even different font weight. All these are things you would then need window size classes for. And our goal is now to implement these different structures of our UI with as little code as possible, of course. So first of all, we can get the window size class here by saying current window adaptive info dot window size class. And this comes from the library we've just added. And technically what we could do is, and what you are okay with in most cases, is you reference the width size class, because usually you decide about responsiveness or whether to show something based on the width. Not always. Sometimes you can also reference the height class here, and we will actually also have to do this here. But in most cases, you can do this based on the width, and then you would have a when expression. So when that window size class would be window size class, enter import that, dot, for some reason it's not there. Window width size class, it's window, come on, window width size class, Alt enter, import that, and then you can say window with size class.compact. That is one. If that is the size class, then show this UI, and you do this for the other two classes, so medium, expanded. You can actually look this up here on the Android documentation. This gives you a little bit of a better visual representation of these window size classes, and also where these breakpoints are when the compact class, for example, switches over to the medium class, and when the medium class from 840 dp of screen width would jump to the expanded class. So you can see typically the compact width class corresponds to a mobile device in portrait, the medium class typically corresponds to a tablet in portrait, and the expanded one to either a tablet in landscape, mobile in landscape actually as well, or a desktop device. Same thing is of course the case here for the height, just different dimension values here. But now we actually have a little bit of a tricky problem, because if we take a look in Figma, our mobile portrait here, this should definitely be shown for the compact window width size class, right? Then as I mentioned, mobile landscape is typically the expanded width class. So the same class where tablet landscape and desktop devices will also be in. However, if we say, okay, for the expanded width class, we show this row-based layout here with the header section on the left and the form section on the right, then this would also be shown like that on tablet landscape. And while here in this Figma designs, there is no tablet landscape variant because it should be identical to the portrait variant, that's the problem here. That right now, in tablet landscape, we would also apply the layout here from mobile landscape and on desktop devices as well. But you can imagine if you have a huge screen, then showing this next to each other is not really looking that nice. However, if we just center everything here perfectly on the screen, then that would look much better on a larger screen, like tablet landscape, like on a desktop device. So we can't solely rely on the window width size class in this case. Instead, we have to come up with combining different width size classes with the corresponding height classes so that we get kind of unique device configurations here. And this is also where the docs come in handy as well. So we can, of course, check both these classes. We can check if the width class is in the compact category and the height class is also in the compact category. So if both width and height class are compact, then this means we are in landscape on a mobile device. I'm sorry, I mean, in this case, it would be the expanded width class and height would be compact, then we know it's a mobile landscape device. If the width is compact and the height is medium, for example, we know it's a mobile portrait device. And this is now how we can combine these different classes. And for this, I will just implement a little helper enum class inside of a util package, because this is really now where responsive design becomes a little bit tricky. But that's, of course, why we're here, and to not just handle the easy cases, but tell you how you can also work with the more complex cases. So in this util package, I will create something like a device type enum, or we can also call it device configuration. This is maybe even clearer. This will be an enum class, and there are now different configurations we care about. So we have mobile portrait on the one hand, mobile landscape, we have tablet portrait, tablet landscape, and on desktop, there is only one orientation, so we don't need to distinguish here. And then we can put a semicolon here, because inside the companion object of the enum class, I want to have a function create this device configuration enum value from a window size class. So here we pass in our window size class and then get a unique device configuration value here, which you can then better check in our UI, because then we can clearly say we are on mobile portrait, we are on mobile landscape, tablet portrait, and so on. So we can say we, on the one hand, have the width class, which is equal to window size window width size class. We have the height class, so we now need to look at unique combinations of these width and height classes. And then we can return a when expression where we check for all these different cases. So for example, when the width class is window width size class.compact and the height class is equal to window height size class dot medium, then we know we are in the mobile portrait category. Because again, if we look up, width is compact, height is medium, width is compact, height is medium, then this shows, okay, on both, in both classes, we would be on a mobile portrait device. So this is now a kind of unique combination tells us pretty certainly that we are on a mobile portrait device. And this is now what we need to do for all these different cases. So we can copy paste this 4 times in total, actually a 5th time. If our width class is in the compact category and the height class is expanded, then this could also be mobile portrait, because there are certain XL devices actually that have the expanded height category. While most of them have medium, there are, for example, the Pixel 9 XL device has the height class expanded, then it would still be mobile portrait. If the width class is expanded, so very wide, and the height class is compact, then this means we are on mobile landscape. If our width class is medium and our height class is expanded, so it's medium wide, but it's very high, then this means tablet portrait. If the width is expanded, so very wide, but the height is medium, then that means tablet landscape. So pretty much just what we had here for portrait, but inversed. And that also makes sense, of course. And in all other cases, where we maybe have an expanded height and an expanded width or so, that means desktop. And now, with this function, we can jump back to our login UI here, where we say, okay, val device configuration is equal to our device configuration dot from window size class, pass in our window size class we got in the UI here, and it complains for some reason. Actual type is window width size class. Is that a mismatch here? Oh no, because I referenced the window width class here. We just want to reference the window size class, pass this down here, and then we can take this device configuration in this when expression. And now instead, simply hit Alt-Enter to add the remaining branches. And now we have clear branches for every single device configuration. We don't need to implement all of these 5 here, because for some of these configurations, we want to show the same UI. Specifically, we want to show the same UI here, if we take a look, in Figma, for tablet portrait here. In tablet landscape, we also want to show the same UI, and for desktop, we want to show this. Then we have a different UI for phone landscape and a different UI for phone portrait. So if we go in here, we can group those a little bit, tablet portrait, landscape, and desktop. These can be put together, so we can just have commas here like this. We have a unique UI for mobile landscape and a unique UI for mobile portrait. So now if we take our existing UI and cut this out to move this into mobile portrait, because this is what it was used for, we will quickly notice that the modifier here that really sets up our UI, that sets up this sheet, the white background, the padding, and so on, that's actually the same in all of these UIs. Here we also have this sheet in tablet as well. So it makes sense to actually take this modifier and extract this into something like a root modifier. So we say root modifier, copy this over, or cut it out here, and then just forward it here so we don't have this duplicated code. But now we can actually take this same code, paste it into a mobile landscape, but here we now want a row. We simply change this to a row, which now doesn't have a vertical arrangement, but actually a horizontal arrangement. And here for the horizontal arrangement, yeah, I think this can stay like that. If we take a look on the designs here, pretty much the 2 sections here, the left section takes up slightly more space, if I'm not wrong. If we take a look at the design here, that has a width of 384, and this one here as well. Okay, so they take up exactly the same space, but there is a little bit more spacing on the left, which comes due to the display cutouts. That's something I will also say something in a moment about. But given that these 2 sections here occupy the same width, we can make use of relative units. That is what I mentioned, because here inside of a row, we don't want to make both these fill the maximum width, but we want to give them weights, and especially equal weight, because weight will take the entire width of this row, whatever it will have, however wide the screen size will be in mobile landscape, and then simply give the header section 50% of the width, and the login form section also 50% of the width, because they get the same weights. You can of course also say this one would have a weight of 2f, then this login form section would get 2/3 of the width, and this login header section would get 1/3. But we want equal spacings here. Then for this root modifier, I want to add some extra horizontal padding, as I mentioned. So horizontal 32 dp, that's just also based on the mockups. And before that, we want to have some extra window insets. Window insets padding, and we pass in window insets dot display cutout. And that's something you very, very often need to consider when working on landscape orientations. What are the display cutouts? I'm not sure if we see this here on my device. No, we don't. But as you probably know, there are certain devices which have an inbuilt camera here. And if we now, of course, rotate the device, then the inbuilt camera is here. And it may overlap our actual content and prevent the user from interacting with that. That is why on mobile landscape, you very often need to add this extra padding here to your UI, so this camera does not overlap with anything. And this padding for the space this camera occupies is implemented in these display cutout window insets. Something that will also make sense here for mobile landscape is that we say we give this vertical scroll here. Remember scroll state. If the device doesn't have a big enough height, then we make it scrollable. And I accidentally launched this on tablet, but I want to launch this on mobile. And let me cancel this build. So there we go. The UI launched again. If we expand this a little bit and rotate, then you can see this is now how our layout looks like in landscape mode. You can see due to the display cutouts, there is slightly more spacing on the left than there is on the right, but that's exactly what we want after all. So what remains is our UI for tablets and desktop devices. So if we go to this last case here and take a look at the mockups again here, then you can see this is actually the same structure as on mobile portrait. So everything is arranged in a column-wise fashion. But what is different is that we have a maximum width for the entire, for both these components, and that the text alignment here for the header section is simply centered and not left aligned. So we can just go to our column for the mobile portrait variant, copy paste this down below, also reference the root modifier. Here we also want to have some extra padding. So that is the variant where I want the 40 dp of top padding. Perhaps also give this a scroll modifier, so vertical scroll, remember scroll state. In here, this column should now actually have horizontal alignment of alignment center horizontally, because everything should be centered on tablet. And then here for these two sections, instead of filling the maximum width, we want to give them a max width. So instead of fill max width, we say within. So we say our width must be in a given range. Minimum can stay undefined here, but the maximum width should be something like 540 dp. Same thing here. So we also say within. Max is 540 dp. And something we need to change is for the login header section, we actually want to be able to pass in an alignment. And that's something we can command click into here. We say, okay, we pass an alignment.horizontal. And then we simply say, okay, here for this column, we pass in the horizontal alignment here to the horizontal alignment parameter. And up here, we can actually default this, for example, to left. So alignment.started is, but then just for the desktop and tablet variant, we can say alignment is equal to alignment center horizontally. Let's launch this now, not on our phone anymore. We can also launch it on the phone, but most importantly on the tablet. So then we can inspect all these different variants. Here, our medium-sized tablet, it has launched, and that is how it's looking like on landscape tablet. You can see our texts are centered. It has a reasonable maximum width here. If we rotate this, it still looks like that on tablet. So landscape here does not have the phone landscape, which would look very ugly if the text would be somewhere up here and the form would be here, which is very, very uncommon for tablets to have a UI like that. And on phone portrait here, it still looks like before. Phone landscape, we still have this landscape specific layout. But as I said, this is still quite a special case here, where you need to have something like this, where you have to use unique combinations of window width and height classes. Very often you're also fine with just relying on the window width class. And then in that case, you don't need this device configuration enum. But in summary, just make sure to rely on as much relative units as possible. Avoid hard coding certain widths and height values of composables unless you really have something like an icon that is always the same size on all kinds of screen dimensions. But for such dynamic components like a text field, a button, definitely work with values like fill max width, like giving it a within modifier, relying on weights in a row or a column, and then make use of your window size classes here to just show different structures of your UI depending on which device you're on, and make sure to extract as much logic as possible into components that in the end all look the same on different screen sizes. Also, something that is worth mentioning here, depending on when you watch this, this Material 3 adaptive library on native Android, this is already a little bit further, and they changed the way a little bit how these window size classes work, specifically that you need a new function, whether the width is at least a specific breakpoint, but the idea is again identical. So these size classes right now also implement that idea that if the width reaches a certain breakpoint, then a different window size class is assigned. So just the logic how you check which variant you want to show of your UI, that will change a little bit, very likely here for Compose Multiplatform once the library catches up with the native one. But if you actually like this UI that we've built here and you would like to practice with such mockups like here on a more regular basis, and you also notice that if you watch a lot of tutorials and courses that all teach you something, but very often when then really using this knowledge in the real world, in your real code, it's always a little bit different. But this is so important to really use this knowledge in the real world, to face errors, to go through struggles. But that's exactly why I've created the Mobile Dev Campus, in which members get such coding challenges, where this is, by the way, just milestone 1 of 4. Every 2 months, you get also such mockups for smaller mini challenges, 5 per month. You get more than 30 hours of video content about Android, mobile development. You have direct access to me and my team. So whenever anything comes up when building these challenges, you can ask that and get a timely answer. So if you say you enjoyed this UI, then I want to help you trying out the Mobile Dev Campus, because I really believe in it. There are almost 400 people in it right now, and it's just such a great place to learn because it combines all the important approaches to learning, communication, practice, and passive learning, so watching videos. So with the discount code responsive50, you get 50% discount on your first month as a campus member on the monthly subscription. So you can just try it out for 50% less in the first month. If you then say, hey, that's not what I expected, you can cancel again and you're not charged again. And if you say, hey, Philip, that's actually a pretty great place, then it's of course a win-win for both of us. And you stay and you get all these coding challenges to really practice app development in the fastest way. So responsive50, make sure to be on the Pro monthly plan. That is where the discount is applicable. Link is down below. And other than that, thanks so much for watching. I will see you back in the next video. Have an amazing rest of your week. Bye-bye.